That's right. And they say that grief rearranges your address book, and
yeah,
it really does in both
yeah,
directions. There's always going to be some people who can't handle what you're
yeah,
going through,
yeah,
because often it's triggering something that they've been through and it's
yeah,
just too much. Um, and or it's a fear that they have. I mean, we all have
yeah.
that fear of loss.
And that's
And then
okay. I feel like
and
that's
it's
okay.
fine, and you've just got to
Yeah,
be able to let that go and not
yeah,
dwell on what went wrong there, or it's just not worth anybody's energy, I
yeah.
don't think. And then there's also incredible unexpected connections of people who step up, who you never expected to be the ones that are now some of your closest friends because they've come
Yeah.
into your life through a tragedy.
Welcome to Midlife Unraveled, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the twists and turns of midlife. I'm your host, Anita Gilbert, and I've transitioned from the corporate world of investment banking to become the proud owner of a yoga and Pilates studio. Together, we're going to navigate the exhilarating roller coaster that is midlife. Each episode, we dive deep with a seasoned expert to rediscover and redefine how to live our best during this life-changing period. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes, brimming with wisdom, insights, inspiration, and a laugh along the way. So strap in, because Midlife Unraveled is about to redefine the way you embrace midlife. Subscribe today and take this journey with us. I am delighted to welcome Emma Gray to Midlife Unraveled. Emma is an international best-selling novelist from Canberra. Her latest book, The Last Love Note, was written in the wake of her husband's sudden death to a heart attack when Emma was 42. The novel became a runaway bestseller in the US, where it was selected for 2 of the major book clubs and featured in Oprah's newsletter. Now, that is a massive achievement. It was voted in the top 100 books by Better Reading in Australia. Emma's 6th book, Pictures of You, will be released this November. I think you're going to love this candid and open conversation with Emma, and let's get started. Emma Gray, I am so delighted to welcome you to Midlife Unraveled.
Thanks, Anita. It's lovely to be here.
I think we should just kick off straight into our conversation. And I'd love to start by asking you, what was life like, both professionally and personally, in the years before Jeff died?
It's interesting. I had just turned 40. Jeff died when I was 42. So I remember that sense when I turned 40 of feeling like this is great. I'm entering this decade that everybody talks about, that women are
Yeah,
always saying is, life begins. It's this idea that you can start to really hit your stride professionally. You sort of maybe figuring out a little bit more what you're doing in your personal life,
yeah,
how you're
yeah.
parenting,
A
all
bit
of
more
that sort of
confidence, I
thing.
feel like, comes at that age too.
That's right. And I was really, really optimistic about the incoming decade.
Mm-hmm.
And we were living a very hectic and busy but wonderful family life with a mixed family, a blended family
Mm-hmm.
of Jeff's 2 young adult children, my 2 children from my first marriage who were teenagers, my daughters, and then together Jeff and I had a little boy who was 5. And, we just felt like the Brady Bunch, and it
Yeah.
was hectic and full on. And he was incredibly supportive of my career. I was
Mm-hmm.
doing a range of different things. I was writing, I'd started writing my first novel, which was a teenage novel. I was co-writing a musical at the time with a
Wow.
composer friend. And I was also coaching and training and just really feeling like finally everything was starting to come together.
Yeah.
And then, as so often does, something completely sideswipes you.
Mm-hmm.
And in our case, it was that we lost Jeff. He died from a heart attack, and so it was completely unexpected.
So no
And
warning, no previous
no,
heart
nothing,
issues, nothing.
nothing. And we went from having the most idyllic weekend we'd ever had as a family,
Oh,
strangely idyllic, to the point where I
yeah.
sort of look back and wonder, did we somehow know what was coming? Um, into being plunged into this horrific nightmare of
Yeah.
loss. And that was now 8 years ago. So it's been a very interesting decade. The 40s didn't pan out anything like what I
No.
imagined.
No, absolutely. Oh, goodness me. I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like for you. Looking back now, were there any strategies in particular that you used to cope in that period, or was it just there weren't nothing so structured?
Nothing so structured, but when I think about it, when you look back, sometimes you can see that you kind of were working things out as you went along. One of the big strategies that I used was just to immediately reach out to everyone I knew. So I'm very open and probably overshare on Facebook, for example. And
I think it's lovely, by the way.
don't know, I'm probably muted by most people. But I did immediately reach out, and the outpouring of support that we got because of being very open about
Yeah.
all of the challenges that we were going through really did help. I had made a decision early on that I would just say yes to any offer of help, no matter what it was, and it just helped with that decision fatigue that you have when you're in shock.
That's very true.
So even if
Yeah.
I didn't understand what something really was that they were offering, I just said yes, and
Yeah.
that helped a lot. I had to get over the whole thing about wanting to be independent and that sense of awkwardness that we often have when
Yeah,
people
yeah.
are offering help. And I did that by realizing that I didn't have to pay these people back, that it was going to be about paying people forward. And
Yeah.
that's something I'm still doing to this
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And I realized that we just all exist in this ecosystem of support, and that sometimes it's your turn to give and sometimes it's your turn to receive.
Yeah.
And once I could get that in my head, that helped.
And people
But
want to help. It's coming
they
from a
do.
good place.
Absolutely.
Why do you
Yes.
think, though, that people are reluctant to share their lowest points? You've said
Yeah.
very openly that you shared it and you were very open about it, and put it out there for people to understand. Why is it that do you think people don't do that?
I don't know, because it's so alien to me not to do it.
Yeah.
I feel, I mean, you do feel exposed and you feel vulnerable and you do wonder what people will think sometimes. But at the same time, all I've learnt by doing this over and over again is that we're all struggling with something. And,
Yeah.
none of us really know what we're doing. We're all muddling through whatever we're going through. And I love that saying that we're all just walking each other home. I can't remember
Oh,
who
I
said
love
that,
that.
but I absolutely adore it.
I'm
And
gonna have to. I'll put that in the show notes and find out.
isn't it beautiful? Yeah. And I feel like that's what we are all doing if we'll
Yeah.
just let each other do it. And
Yeah.
so I have never once ever had a negative result of having shared a struggle that I'm going through.
Yeah.
And I think it may be in how you do it. I think I'm also not a person that's ever had a victim mindset. So
Yeah.
I think, and on the other side of the spectrum, I also share the good stuff that happens. So I think
Yeah.
when you just decide to be there in every way, from the highs and lows, it's easier to share at both ends of the spectrum. And I think that's what builds connection and relationships with
Yeah.
people as well.
And I think people feel like everybody's going through their own issues, whatever they may be. So I feel like to have that connection with other people is just crucial. Like people, we're all depressed by looking at the sort of, Instagram, social media, people who just seem to have that perfect life. We all know it's not true. We all know it's staged. But to actually have somebody come out and say, I am really hurting, I'm in pain, I do need support, is a very vulnerable and open thing to do. And I feel like you do build that connection with people because, everybody has so much that they're dealing with, whatever level it happens to be. So I think your vulnerability and your openness just forge those connections with people, and maybe even with people that you didn't know so well. So you've got your core group of close friends, but maybe those not so close friends, they were drawn in and closer as well because of that. And
That's right. And they say that grief rearranges your address book. And It really does in both
Yeah.
directions. There's always going to be some people who can't handle what you're
Yeah.
going through,
Yeah.
because often it's triggering something that they've been through and it's
Yeah.
just too much. Um, or it's a fear that they have. I mean, we all have
Yeah.
that fear of loss.
And that's
And then
okay. I feel like
and
that's
it's
okay.
fine. And you've just got
Yeah.
to be able to let that go and not
Yeah.
not dwell on what went wrong there, or it's just not worth anybody's energy, I
Yeah.
don't think. And then there's also incredible unexpected connections of people who step up, who you never expected to be the ones that are now some of your closest friends because they've come
Yeah.
into your life through a tragedy. It's quite remarkable,
Yeah.
the different connections that you make.
Yeah.
And I've found that because I do a lot of writing, and I've found that I'm connecting a lot with my readers through in this way as well. People who across the world who have been through something similar and who reach out, and we get into an amazing discussion
Yeah.
in a way that helps both of us.
That's fabulous. I love that. Has this, you mentioned the blended families, has this changed the way that you parent your children?
I think any loss does help us to see that life is short and
Yeah.
that we
Don't sweat the
that
small
not everything
stuff.
matters. It's the picking your battles thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always did have an emphasis on their mental health above anything else,
Yeah.
and that has just increased, I think, since he died.
Mm.
That I value that as the number one um, parenting duty that I have,
Yeah.
is to help them with their mental health, because
Yeah.
obviously they've been through a huge amount. We've got a lot of other, anxiety and that sort of thing thrown in,
Yeah.
which is really challenging. It's brought us all much closer together, and we already were a really close family, but it's been quite beautiful to see, particularly how the older siblings have helped their younger brother through this
Yeah.
incredible loss. Um, and I've just been very grateful for the connections that I still have with Jeff's two children from his first marriage, who are now adults, and already were adults, but we've maintained a beautiful family relationship, and I'm so grateful for that, because that's really
Yeah.
important for my son.
Absolutely. That he's got that connection as well that hasn't kind of drifted away.
Yeah.
And I think important for all of you to be able to come together and to keep that closeness that was obviously so special to Jeff as well.
Yes, that's right.
Was there a moment that you recognized that you had the strength to keep going and build a future for yourself? I just imagine that you're in this kind of vast, just empty cave of grief, and moving through that must seem impossible at the time. But was there a moment that you can think back and think, well, that was the turning point?
When you said that, the moment that popped into my head was also one of the scariest moments, which was the first day that we moved into this house, which is Jeff had died at home. So I eventually sold that house and moved and built a house from scratch, because I just wanted to sort of symbolically have this fresh start for the family. And that first night that we moved in, it was about this time of year. In fact, it was in 2 days, it'll be the anniversary of us moving in. Anyway, so it was winter and we had no furniture yet and nothing had been unpacked, and the house felt different, and we didn't know where the switch was to turn the gas heating on, it, like all this sort of stuff, And I thought, what have I done? I felt really unmoored from everything I knew, and I thought, what have I done? Have I done the right thing? And we've got photos of us sitting on the floor, because there was no furniture, eating takeaway pizza that first night. But it was the next day when the sunlight came in and the house is full of light. You can see how bright it is in
I
the
can see
background.
behind you. It's absolutely stunning.
Yeah, and I deliberately went, said to the builders, I want lots of natural light. I just needed to go from that darkness that we'd experienced to this really vibrant house where I feel like I need to wear sunscreen all the time inside. Anyway, and we started to fill it up with furniture, and there was just this, I think that was the turning point. It was this new start, a fresh start, and knowing that we'd had the courage to pack up everything, move, make something new that was of our own, and the kind of house that Jeff wouldn't probably he wouldn't want to live where we live. It's too far out. He wouldn't like the way I've decorated anything, But it was this whole sense of we need to start again because
Yeah.
we're still
Yeah.
alive. And I think it was that. I think that was probably the moment. And that was 2 years after he
Yeah.
died.
Was it hard at the same time to leave that old house? Did you feel like that you were almost leaving his memories behind?
Yes, it was. I have a friend who's a photographer, and she really helped with this because she came in very early on. Actually, I found that I couldn't touch anything, even in that first few days after he died. I couldn't touch the clothes on the clothes era of his,
Yeah.
and just anything that he had left. And she came in and said that she'd done this before with others, where she'd gone in and just taken photos of everything just as it was. And so we've got
Yeah.
this beautiful book of memories of just how it was on his last day. And
Yeah.
that
I would never even
I
that would
would never have thought
never
of it.
even
And I
cross my mind that it's a beautiful thing to do, but
He
it
is.
really is, especially since now that you're not in the same house, but
Exactly.
you have that beautiful connection and
Yeah.
almost a window into that time,
Yes.
when Jeff was alive and part of
That's
your
right.
lives. And
Yeah. And
yeah.
often I think we take photos of things when they look really good, the
Yeah,
clean kitchen.
that's true.
We
Yeah,
never take a
you don't want
photo
the
of what.
photos at home. Like, okay, get us so the kitchen mess in the
That's
kitchen
right.
isn't in
And
the
and
background.
then if you find a photo that happens to have the mess,
Yeah.
you pore over it, trying to work out
Yes.
what all that stuff was, and
Yeah.
it's that is actually the memory, and we try
Yeah.
to erase that stuff. So that in itself, I think, was a really good lesson to learn that, we live. It's the moments that we're really living, not the moments we're
Yeah.
trying to show
Yes.
ourselves at our best.
Yeah.
That really are the ones you want to hold
Yeah.
on to.
Completely random, but I remember reading somewhere they had a family who took a photo of their kitchen bench every day at the same time. It was like when the kids had come home from school.
Oh yeah,
And I just thought that was a fascinating thing
yeah.
because it was very much a window. There were the soccer boots on there, the school notes,
Mhm.
and when they got older, there were different. It was a
Yeah,
real kind of a little window into daily life,
I love it.
and absolutely fascinating. So that just
Mhm.
reminded me of that album that you now have. So
Yes.
it's so beautiful.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Good.
how have you changed?
I often wonder what Jeff would think if he walked in now. That I often think if 8 years on he was to walk through the front door now, what would he notice about all of us?
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that his son, who was 5, would now tower over him.
Oh.
Like so much has changed. I think that I'm really quite. I turned 50 last year, and I remember the thing that I was really proud of was that I'd had that experience of turning 40 a decade ago and thinking, I was all gung-ho and happy about the 40s,
Yeah.
and then that went wrong, and terribly wrong, and it was just awful. And then we scrambled through all of that, and I managed to turn 50 with the same sense of optimism back again. And I think
Wow.
that to me is probably when people say, what's your biggest achievement in life? That springs to mind, that and
Yeah.
getting the kids through this. That's
Almost that 10-year block almost represents the getting through that period. So that 10 years is your I can't think of the right word now, but
it's like
is your tunnel through.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And I have grown so much, just in terms of, I guess, courage. I don't care as much about what people think. I've let go of a lot of things. I'm chasing a lot of dreams all the time. I'm overcoming my fear of rejection, and I'm going for things. And
Yeah.
I think that's just because I know that nothing is guaranteed, and that I know that at any moment we won't be here anymore. So
Yeah.
it's really helped to shape that kind of perspective. And I think
Yeah.
that's been the learning from this. And that, and the fact that we now know for sure that we can get through hard things. And so when anything else crops up that's difficult or challenging, we have this yardstick, the way a lot of mothers view childbirth,
Yeah.
got through that, therefore I can get through this. It's
Yeah.
that sort of feeling.
Yeah. Do you have a renewed confidence now?
I think so, yes. And it wavers, it goes up and down, but certainly I'm a much more confident person now than I was a decade ago, I think. And maybe that would have happened anyway,
Yeah.
in that very sort of crucial decade of growth into middle age. But certainly I think when you go through something really this deep and difficult, forges new, I don't know what it's forging, but it's forging something inside of you that helps you to
a strength of
engage with the
character,
world.
isn't it? It's a strength
Yeah.
within you that
Yeah, I
you
think so.
can. If you've dealt with that, you can deal with things.
Mm.
Wow. Okay, now I do want to talk about your book as well. You have written this most incredible book, The Last Love Note, and I'm reading it at the moment. It is really wonderful, and I would recommend anybody who is out there wanting a good read. This is the one to go for. Now, I had a few questions I really was keen to ask you about the book. You've talked about this decade of grief at this very, very difficult time. When did you start to think, I'm going to write a book about this?
Probably within the first week after Jeff died.
Wow. Okay.
Only because I already was a writer, and
Yeah.
I had already started just in writing things on Facebook that first week to tell people what had happened.
Yeah.
I'd started working through the loss in words, and I knew that was the only way that I was ever going to get through it, was to figure it all out in writing.
And that's
just
how
because
you
that's how I
expressed
process
yourself.
the world.
Yeah.
And what morphed then was, but I had no idea what sort of book I would eventually write, and had no intention of starting to write the book then. I just sort of thought, I bet I write a book one day on this, just sort of had this knowing. And then it must have been, I don't know, it was a couple of years after that I first put words on the page. And then it took another several years, because I remember having a first draft sort of finished at about 3 years into the loss, and thinking, okay, I think that's okay. It's pretty good. We can probably start sending that out to publishers for consideration. And then I realized after a while, I haven't even learnt what I need to learn about grief yet. It's still quite 3 years is still actually quite early, I've realized.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Well, maybe in 15 years I'll look back and say, yeah, remember she was talking about 3 years? 8 years was also really early. I don't know.
10, 20.
Yeah. But it was then I feel as though I was going through the loss alongside my character of Kate. And that was very healing and cathartic for me.
So how did you, because you're reliving it. So how did you deal with writing it and reliving it? Was there a way of kind of you compartmentalize it almost and create that separation between the character and you, or were you very much going through it again as you wrote the book?
I feel as though when you've had a loss this deep and heavy, you are constantly carrying it with you every day. So there is no reliving it, because you already are living it at all times. It's almost like it's a soundtrack to your life anyway. So it's not like I had to suddenly go back into something. I was already in it. And then I did change the storyline and give Kate's husband a different cause of death. I don't know, I won't give you any spoilers, but it is actually the cause of death that took my mum, who died last year. And so that perhaps was the harder part for me, because mum at that point was still alive. So I was writing about that way of dying, which was almost more emotional than writing about the loss and how it felt afterwards. But this is where I came back to those initial Facebook posts that I wrote on the day that everything happened. I had the in the moment, this is exactly how I feel on day 3 kind of record to sort of draw from. And I think that's what's probably made it seem so real, the storyline.
Did you have to personally overcome anything in order to start writing? Like, did you have to feel that, okay, I have to get to this place before I can even start to look at putting a book together?
I think with any book you have to do that, because there's, regardless of the topic, there's this huge amount of self-doubt. Can I really do this? And you're writing a book and putting a book out there is something you are very exposed. You are basically putting your heart and soul into a massive project and then handing it to the world and saying, why don't you all pile on and tell everyone else in the world what you think of this?
Well, I think
write reviews and everyone could read them.
I think in this situation, that's tenfold, because
It is.
the
Yeah.
story is so personal to you.
Yeah.
It's not like you've written a story about, you've made up a character, you've made up a storyline. This is you. This is what you've lived.
Yeah.
And to have it out there in the world and for people to be critiquing it, that's a massive, massive vulnerability.
Yes, and then it ended up taking off and becoming a bestseller in the US. So it's been this
phenomenal.
massive thing where I felt, I mean, I did a podcast recording there that was in front of an audience. Well, their audience is 1.2 million people.
Wow.
So that was probably the hardest one, because I
Yeah.
thought, it's sort of challenging enough. And that was in front of a live studio audience as well, which
That's scary.
so, it was a lot. But I did have to and I was actually, in the couple of weeks before it came out in Australia, where it came out first, I was very anxious. I was really
Yeah.
thinking, is the grief in this novel going to be criticised? I almost didn't care if the writing was criticised. I just thought, it's not even me. A lot of her is me, but I thought, this is not even my exact story. You know, will she be criticised because she's falling in love with someone else, which I haven't done myself, but,
Yeah.
it was all of that. And I quickly learnt that the reviews were so kind and compassionate, and people were, messaging with their own stories. And I then relaxed, because people were just so beautiful in the way that they embraced it. But and the other thing that I struggled with was that I had a lot of survivor guilt. I wouldn't have this book and these experiences. I wouldn't be speaking at the New York Public Library and all this sort of stuff, if Jeff hadn't died, because I wouldn't have written it. And
So
I
how
had
do
to
you deal
get
with
in.
that? How
Well, I
on
had to
earth
get my head around this and remember just how supportive he was of my career, how much he would love to have, if he could be witnessing any of this, he would, be standing up and cheering, because he would much rather be seeing this than me not being able to continue on, which was one of the options.
Yeah.
And actually, I remember that from the first dinner that I had, where I remember it was sort of a few weeks after he died. I went for dinner with a friend, and we had a lovely night, and I was walking back to the car, and I realised I had a smile on my face. And then I felt so guilty, thinking, how could I possibly be smiling when my husband died? And then it occurred to me that if he was watching, he would have been looking for that first smile and waiting for it, and would be so delighted to see it. And then all the smiles after that as well. So I think, it's not about toxic positivity or trying to be making the most of every moment or anything unrealistic like that. But it is about chasing the light and looking for the joy in life and the connections, and the opportunities.
Yeah. And I also think that if if the situation was different, he would want that for you. Do you know what I mean?
Totally,
That sounds like an awful thing to say, but
No. Yes.
you sort of think that this is what he would have wanted for you.
Yes,
he would
it
have
is.
wanted you to write a bestseller. He would have been so incredibly proud of you for doing that. And I understand how totally understand how you the survivor guilt comes in. But
well, the other thing I've done is I see this book now as the legacy of our love, and I'm able to see that it is helping other people. I did have a widow who'd only lost her husband a few weeks earlier get in touch and say that she'd read it. She felt like it was the only person in the world that understood her, and she'd been carrying it around in a handbag ever since, because it felt like company. And that sort of feedback makes it all worthwhile, makes all of that fear of putting it out there, and it just sort of encapsulates why I did it. Partly to heal myself, but partly just to make grief accessible to other people, and to talk about something that we find really difficult to talk about.
Yeah. Did it heal you?
It really has. I really think it has. And I think until I got this story out of my system, I sort of couldn't start to think about the future in a different way. And it's been a complete ride. It's been exhausting. I've been, up doing 2 a.m. calls with the US and things. So I've had a lot, and I've written another book in the last year. So there's been a lot of
just avoid a little bit of boredom.
And still doing day job work as well. So it's just there's been a lot, but it has. I feel the grief is still there, but it feels sort of complete in some way. And I think that's because I was able to document it and get it out onto a page.
I'm curious, when you wrote the book, did you write it chronologically, or was it like a puzzle and you sort of put pieces and
No,
then it all
I
went
wrote it
together?
I just wrote it the way, well, no, I wrote a version of it the
Yeah.
way that the story came. So I don't plot books. I just make it up as I go along,
Okay.
which is dangerous and terrifying, but really fun. And actually got COVID the first time back in, whenever it was, 2021 or something.
Yeah.
And I had the book deadline on the Tuesday, and I was really sick on the weekend, and I was feverish and delirious probably.
Oh, no.
And I decided the night before it was due, I might just reorder it. I might just rearrange it, move this big chunk of several chapters
I'm
over
thinking
here.
that's not a wise move when you're in that bit.
And I posted that on Facebook, and my poor agent saw that and thought, what is happening? It's
What is she doing? Stop.
Anyway, that's the version that we've ended up with. So there's something to
Yeah.
be said for just letting your subconscious mind have free reign, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. How close to real life are the characters in the book?
Kate is very much like me. There's a lot of chaos around her that is very much like what happens here.
I
There's
can
a
so
whole-
relate to that part of it.
Yeah, there's a whole opening scene.
In a flap.
Yes, totally in a flap. And there's a whole opening scene where her little boy wanders out holding a military grenade. That actually happened in our family. We had the army and the bomb squad, everyone at our house.
Oh my
And
goodness.
of course, that was brilliant for me as a writer, because I just thought, this is gold. Make a really good
Every
opening
writer
chapter.
wants those lived experiences.
And then all of her loss is absolutely everything that I've thought, everything that she thinks I have thought. And so the funny parts of her are me, the saddest parts are me as well.
Yeah.
And the hope, I think, is mine as well.
I feel like it would be hard to make that up.
Yeah.
Because you've lived it, you go through it, you can only really see it from your own perspective. And you may change little bits of it here and there, but I feel that it stays true to being your story.
Yes, and that's been the most consistent feedback, I think, from people who've said they were only a couple of pages in when they realised the author of this book had to have lived this story, had to have lived the grief.
Yeah, I think definitely. Even the grenade, I thought that was very...
Yeah.
I didn't even think that was made up.
Well, you wouldn't. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
Exactly. People are probably thinking, what the hell are they talking about? So grab the book, everyone, you'll find out. No, it's awesome. I always think that when we have difficult situations in our lives, we learn something, and somehow that makes bearing that situation a little bit easier, and we can hold it a bit closer. What have you learnt through this whole decade?
One thing I've learnt is to let go of a lot of things that don't matter, and just to love your people as hard as you can, because you don't know how long you have.
Yeah.
Yourself or any of them. And so I've learnt to really appreciate life itself, the little things in life, just little life affirming things. My friend Rebecca Sparrow gave me some advice really early on that I've held on to and used ever since, and passed on every time I have an opportunity like this.
Yeah.
She had lost her baby daughter, Georgie, who was stillborn, and Beck said to me that she made a decision, and it was a decision. It wasn't, she had to really think about it and decide to have this approach, that she would that she would have Georgie's life turn up the light in her life, not turn it down. And
that's beautiful.
And it was the thing that I held on to, and it was the approach that we took. It's the approach Kate takes in the novel. And I guess the most realistic, most sort of visceral example of that was that I became obsessed with finding the Aurora Australis. Yeah. And I would be out in the middle of the dark, in the middle of a country road in the dark, in just complete dark, not seeing anything. But then you stand out there, and if you stand there long enough and look up, you start to see stars. And if you're really lucky and the aurora is present and you've got a camera, you can see that too. And it was just this incredible, beautiful phenomenon in the sky that you actually can't see with the naked eye unless you're down in Tasmania or right up the top of,
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
You mainly can see it through a camera.
Yeah.
With the long exposure photography. And it gave me this really strong image that we don't know the magic that's around us and the beautiful aspects of life that are right in front of us.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can't see them, and it's a matter of having that courage to keep looking for it. And I think that's what I've learned, that even in the darkest of times, you can still have magical experiences, but you have to be out there looking for them, and you have to keep looking up.
Yeah, I feel like that's very symbolic as well. You said you can only see it in the darkest of night.
That's
And,
right.
you know, that is very symbolic. You know, you're in that darkness of the situation, and to be able to capture that light, and almost see that as a connection to Jeff, I think, to see the positivity and the light, and to inspire you to move forward and keep just putting one foot in front of the other, living one more day.
That's right. Exactly.
It must have been so hard with the children, with the family. You know, you're trying to hold the children together, you're trying to hold yourself together. Is there anything that you look back on now that you kind of would have changed or done, differently in the way that you dealt with those years after Jeff's death?
I think the only thing I would have done differently would have been moved earlier. So I moved 2 years after he died. I would have moved in that, because they say don't make any major decisions in the first 12 months. So I didn't. Mind you, looking back, I did have a million ideas of what I could do that year. I might move to Ireland. I might house swap. I might knock down all these walls. And, I did go through.
Yeah.
So I can understand where that thinking comes from. But I sort of wish, because there was this real moment that I mentioned before where we just felt different. And I think it's a pity we didn't feel that a bit earlier on.
Yeah.
But as for the kids, I was always really, the mother in you is the same after the loss, in that you tend to want to put them first, and their grief seems more important than yours. And it's that same thing that we get all the time, where we've got to be careful about that because we still need to be functioning ourselves.
Yeah.
But I really did always let them see my emotions. So there'd be times when I couldn't stop crying, and they needed to learn that that's normal and okay.
Yeah.
And that I wasn't going to completely fall apart, and that I just had to let it out. And we would sometimes get in a car, we'd be in our pajamas and we'd go to our friend's house, and I would call ahead and say, we're coming, I can't stop crying. We're all getting in the car, have the hot chocolates ready when we land on the doorstep.
Oh, goodness.
And
But isn't
Sal
that,
would do that.
so
So
that's beautiful that you would reach out, because somebody else may not do that and just kind of close the door, lock the door, and just keep it all in. Whereas I feel like reaching out to those people around you and almost giving them the opportunity to help you, which is what they're trying to do and what they want to do.
yes,
And even in that comforting, they can't change anything, but they can comfort you, and they can,
that's it.
just the power of a big hug.
It is.
And a cup of hot
And
chocolate.
Yeah, that's right. And I have always said to people, sometimes I get a lot of questions from people who say somebody else has died, how can they help them? What's my advice to them as the helper?
Yeah.
And I've always said, there's always so much help at the start, and then people have to go back to their lives, and that's how it is, and we're all like that. But the people who are going through the loss are going to need things for the years to come, and that your moment to shine in helping might be 2 years down the track, and that will be incredibly valuable when the time comes.
Yeah.
We still have people 8 years on who will step in and help us if we need anything, and in the meantime, we've gone and helped a whole lot of other people. It's now back to that dynamic.
Yeah.
But at that time, and it was that everyone has their own skill set too. May not be a really great cook, and so and the fridge might already have 10 lasagnas in it. So I did have a friend who's really good at admin, and she saw me struggling to fill out the Centrelink forms, which anyone struggles with, and
forms of any kind.
doesn't matter. Forms of any kind. And she's very good at that. So she volunteered to come and sit beside me. I just brought the paperwork and she sat there and filled it out for me.
Yeah.
And I signed it. That kind of thing that you wouldn't necessarily think is a normal response.
Yeah.
It's that. It's unique little things. I had a group of friends who decorated the house with Christmas lights that first Christmas in secret, because they knew that I was there with a 5-year-old and I was struggling to make it magical for him.
Yeah.
And then they took over, and there's so many different ways that we can be there for the people around us.
That's
The
right.
main thing is too that nobody knows what to say, and it can be very easy to stay away from the grief-stricken family because you don't know
Yeah.
and you don't want to muck it up. And the only way that you can muck it up is by not turning up.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what you say, just say, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And that's enough. And
And I
I
think
think that's
sometimes it's just that reaching out, whether it's a text message or a phone call or an email or something, but just that for that person to know that you're thinking of them
yes.
is huge as well.
Yeah, my friends and I got into a thing where we would write NNR at the end of any message that they would send, and it would mean no need to respond. So they'd say,
Oh,
thinking of
that's so
you,
nice.
NNR.
Yeah.
And it was that little code acronym made
Yeah.
our lives so much better because I was sometimes swamped with messages
Yeah.
and, it was just something simple. And to be able to just articulate, that's what I need. I just need
Yeah.
to be able to not respond to you, but
Yeah.
I've seen it. That
Because
kind of
it's
thing.
another thing that's then on my list to do.
Yes, that's right.
Oh. Now, I feel like we've picked up a lot of things on the way through this conversation, but I would love to ask you what three takeaways that you can share with people who are perhaps going through their own grief or their own difficult situations. What can you recommend from your own life experience?
I think we probably have talked about most of them. It'd be to be open about what you're going through and to share it with somebody, even if that's hard, and it is
Yeah.
hard for everybody and harder for some people than others. Um, there may be people who you share it with who don't respond the way that you want them to, and it's just about accepting that that's the case and that not everyone can cope with it, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
don't let that stop you from reaching out to other people. If we can't reach out to people we know, you can reach out to your GP. And,
Yeah.
it never occurred to me to go to the doctor because my husband died. And my sister took me the day after he died. And then it was incredible. She was able to help me with a whole lot of stuff.
Wow.
That
Okay.
sort of thing
That would never dawned on me. Yeah.
doesn't dawn on you. And so the reaching out thing and the accepting help is absolutely massive. And if you can just get into the mindset of we're all walking each other home,
Yeah.
I can pay these people forward later on when I'm stronger,
Yeah.
then it makes it easier for you to accept that help now and to remember it does help the people who are helping you, to give them something to do.
Yeah. I feel like that's if you can try and keep that in mind as well, I feel like that's really important because it's like
Yes.
they're not doing you a favor. They're doing this because they want to do something.
Yes.
They want to, and it's helping them as much as it's hopefully helping you as well. So to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And then the other one is just that one about looking for the light and, allowing some of the difficult things that happen in our lives not to stop us and to dim our own lives, our own lights and turn everything down, but to think, right, I'm going through this. It's horrible. It's difficult, but what can I do? How can I turn this around in some way and forge through life in a way that I turn the light up and find some meaning from it? I'm very careful talking about things like post-traumatic growth, which a lot of people do experience, but not everyone.
Yeah.
But there are things that you can find, courage that you can find, and a new path that you can forge.
Yeah.
But you have to be looking for it. And at the same time, I would also just say that it's perfectly fine to sometimes just never get out of bed for the day and spend a day in bed in your pajamas watching Netflix, because I've done that plenty of times as well.
Yeah.
We can't always be on. So
Yeah. Do you still have days like that?
I do still have days, every so often like that. It's easier when you've got family that you've got to get up for.
Yeah.
I think in some ways.
When it comes to you now, do you lean into it and just
I do. And
stay in
also
bed?
I do, unless I realise that this is if it's just the odd day here and there, I will do that. If I realise that actually no, it's not the odd day, it's turning into more of a pattern, then I go straight to the doctor and talk about my mental health and get help with that. And I'm really open about that as well.
Yeah. Did you find that you reached out to professionals after Jeff's death? Was it like psychologist, or
Yeah.
you said you went to the GP. Was that?
That was the first step. Yeah.
Okay.
And then grief counselling, children's grief counselling, Camp Magic, which is a fantastic organisation for kids who've lost a parent.
Yeah.
I reached out and found a group of other young widowed people in Canberra where I live.
Yeah.
They formed this amazing support network for me and other people. So just I'm constantly reaching out to this day, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's almost like you're a spider spinning a web that sustains you, that holds the whole family. You can't do it on your own.
Yeah.
You have to make these links with other people to get through.
And it's those small links that all add into that beautiful web of support. And also, I love that analogy of thinking of it like a spider web, because that does move and does flow. And if one little bit breaks down, it's okay, because we've got the rest there to support you and to give you that courage to keep moving forward.
Exactly.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So, Emma, where can people find you? Where can they buy this wonderful book?
Well, they should be able to buy it most places. It's actually been selected as one of the top 100 books by the Better Reading poll, which means it's going to be in Big W for the next 12 months. So that's probably first port of call.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
It was amazing. I got mine on Amazon.
Yeah, well, Amazon's great as well.
Arrived the next day.
I mean, I love the independent booksellers, but you can't sort of beat the immediacy of Amazon. But they can find me online at emmagray.com.au, Gray with an EY, and then Emma Gray Author on Instagram and Facebook.
Fantastic. And you've got a new book coming out. What's the name of that? Can you share that with us?
Yes, Pictures of You.
Okay. And any little clues as to what that's about?
It's really, so if the last love note's all about love and loss, this one is all about love and control. So it's very topical. My daughter is doing a PhD in criminology, looking at violence against women. So there's a lot of there's coercive control and that kind of topic. That's the depth in that book, but there's also a beautiful love story separate from that. So I like to do the light and shade in these books.
I'm just thinking that after coming through such a difficult period yourself, you dive right into another difficult topic.
Yeah.
How is that? Sorry, we weren't finishing up. We're going again.
No, that's okay. Because I don't plot them, I don't expect that that's going to happen, and then it just happens and I have to go with it. That's how it feels. It sounds a bit strange, but I've just started writing the next book after this, and it's probably the most complicated one that I've ever written in terms of structure, and I'm just really enjoying the challenge of being able to pull that off if I can. So I feel like I'm never going to write a story that's just entirely light ever again. I think once you've been through something like this, everything seems to have that darkness as well as the light, and I think you just have to lean into it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there, actually. Emma, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you, and
You too.
what a beautiful, beautiful story you've written, and what a beautiful story you've got to share with everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anita. I think it's lovely what you're doing, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share and subscribe so you can stay updated with more from Midlife Unraveled. To see more Midlife Unraveled, follow us at midlifeunraveled.com or at Midlife Unraveled on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you soon.